In this video, you're going to learn destructuring with objects. So just like you did with arrays, you can also use destructuring with objects by matching values in different objects. So let's start by creating an object and call it person. I'll give it a couple of properties, name and age. Now, if you write something like this, and you set it to person, then JavaScript is going to match the different elements that it finds inside the object, and it's going to identify the new elements which you are declaring in using const, and it's going to set them to the corresponding values inside our object. So N is going to be set to John and A is going to be set to 41. So you can check that by logging these two values, and this is what you get. Now, you can also use what we call deep matching, meaning that instead of having simple values like that, you can actually have object literal structures instead of these values. So what does it mean? So let's define an object structure like that. So you got a property country, and we're declaring a variable C, and then we got a property address. But instead of declaring a variable A, for example, or anything else, we're going to have an object here, and inside this object we're going to have a couple of properties, postcode, which we'll set to B, and house number, which we'll set to a variable HN. Now, if you set this to another object where these values are defined, for example, then JavaScript is going to perform a deep matching between these two elements, and it's going to set C to UK, B to the postcode, and HN to the house number. So let's find out. And that's what we get. All right, so that's what we call deep matching with ES6 destructuring. Now let's try something else. So if you write something like name and age, equal to person, in ES6 this is exactly the same as writing name, age. All right, so to simplify things, you just write name and age like that. And now if you log name and age, you get the correct values thanks to the destructuring. All right. So let's just write this is the same as all right. Now, just like we did with arrays, you also can use default values with objects. So if you do something like and sets a default value for the country like that, and you set this, for example, to an object which you define right before. So let's set this to city, New York, for example. Then you log the city and country variables, this is what you get in this scenario. So the country by default is USA, and we didn't provide the country in this object. So when you do matching, you match city to New York, and you don't find a match for country, so you use the default value. Now if you specify the country here, then that's going to be different, and we're going to use that value. All right, now this is exactly the same as writing city alone and country alone without mentioning the variables. All right, so as you know, in ES5, if you want to do this, it's going to be really laborious. You will need to specify or check the conditions. So you're going to check if object country is undefined, and then you're going to act accordingly, right, depending on whether the condition is fulfilled or not. All right, so now you can use object destructuring to process return values, just like what we did with arrays. So for example, if you define a function process string, which takes a string x and returns an object with a couple of properties, value and length, then you can simply declare variables like that inside an object. So for example, value and length. So again, this is the same as writing value colon value and length colon length. So if you set that to the return of the function and then log the variables value and length, you get the values that you expect. All right. So this was a quick overview of destructuring with objects in ES6. In the next video, you're going to see destructuring with functions.